Thanks for the introduction, Chad. It's great for me to present to you folks this evening. Um, I know I probably won't have answers for everyone, but do appreciate questions and thoughts going forward here. When Chad originally called me about doing this, it was bull selection and genetic improvement. Um, I just want to point out that there's a couple things here that, as we go through, I think makes a big difference. So the first thing is your on-farm goals, and that's for anyone. Chad mentioned that we show cattle a little bit, but that's not necessarily our total goal at home here. We want to make good cows that raise good calves, and hopefully the show cattle combined with that. I think everyone that's on the call here should realize what their on-farm goals are, and I'll talk about that a bit as we go on here. Everyone has to also realize that results in your calf crop are genetics plus environment. Genetics aren't the only thing. Um, they're part of it, but also as well what your environment is like, and that's not necessarily always in your control, as we've seen this summer with the way the rainfall was and that kind of thing. So there's different things there in terms of your environment, both geography and where you live, as well as these years like this that have been challenging. Um, we can't always blame genetics on some of the performance that we see through those kind of times. And then I'll talk a little bit about sire selection, bull versus AI. I'll just compare some things there. I just want to talk about on-farm goals, and I think everyone needs to think about this themselves. Um, when do you want to sell them? And I understand maybe one of your other speakers will talk about that. This year, again, was a challenging year. Um, would it be better to sell them earlier or later? Um, and that will affect how you select sires if you want to change that time. So sometimes if your cow herd needs to be open longer, where they can have a rest period, that will help. That leads into my next point here. Even ourselves here, sometimes we let our calves be on our cows maybe a little bit too long. So we don't ship them until, October time, and they only have a month or so there, or 2 months to recuperate and uh, and have a calf again in January or February. So that's something to think about in terms of a sire selection. If you want a sire that makes calves really big quick, and we'll talk about that performance on calves, or do you want them just to grow moderately and then maybe give the cows a more open period? Um, Little talk about smaller and larger cows. Um, I I think everyone on the call would love to have the highest, um, how do I say this, um, value at selling, but we really need to think about the cost of that, whether it's better to sell 20 calves that are a little bit smaller or 15 calves that are bigger. And everyone needs to consider that in their own environment at home, whether they have more feed, less feed, more pasture, all those kind of things. And that leads into this farm environment and feed. Um, I think we all know there's other places in North America where there's less grass. They have to walk a lot longer. They have to survive in different climates. So we need to be aware of what our cows can do and what we have. We're fortunate here in Ontario usually to have a lot of feed, and we're fortunate to be close to corn if we really need it. So I think we need to think about that in terms of your herd and what your goals are there. Again, yeah, more cows versus less cows. Everyone can have um, 1,500 pound cows, or they can have 1,200 pound cows. That's just your decision, and everyone needs to think about that. So when we talk about building genetics through sire selection, we need to be informed or at least be aware of what our goals are at home. And I'm not going to argue that one of those is better than the other. I think it just depends on your environment and what you want to do at your farm. Just I'll throw in color. Um, I think even color is better. So different breeds. I'm not going to comment on breeds. I think every breed has a great input on genetics. So but it does influence sometimes how you market your cattle. So I just threw that in there. Um, not not saying one is better than the other, definitely not. But just something to consider for people as we use crossbreeding programs, something to consider. And then again here, I'll just say that environment plus genetics equals performance. So as we talk about sire selection, keep in mind half of or a big chunk of what you're going to get out of your genetics is the environment that you provide them. So it's very important to think about genetics, what they can do, but as well we need to be focused at home to know what our environments are. So I'm going to talk a little bit here, oops, about three things I think are important in sire selection. Um, Phenotype is one thing that's very important, which is hard to numerize, structure, and then EPDs. So I do have a little graph about EPDs. But I will say there's a number of things that are important in sire selection, and I think it comes back to what you really want when you consider what your cow herd is and what you want to do with them. But there's a couple things here that are very important and they're hard to measure. So phenotype and structure are things that are a little bit harder to measure than other things. And when I talk about those two things, I'm talking about uh, foot quality, bone structure, muscle shape, those kinds of things. When I talk about EPDs, there's lots of numbers there that do get, they're fairly accurate in terms of birth weight, weaning weight, all those kinds of things. But there's a couple of things there that are really hard to measure. And as an individual breeder, you really need to look into those things somehow, whether that's calling the producer, whether you're buying a bull, whether you're, using an AI sire. You need to look into those things, I think, in terms of trying to make that part of your breeding program. So this is I just put a quick graph up here about EPDs, and when we're talking sire selection, this is one of the tools that you might have, especially if you're using AI or whether you're purchasing a bull. These are some of the things that are available to look at and use. And as I said before, they're just part of one of the tools in the toolbox. Um, but there's a couple things specifically I'd like to point out here, and those are the breed ranking. So every beef breed has a little bit different numbers. So when we're talking about birth weight and yearling weight and milk, all those kind of things, each breed has a different number that they're working with. What I consider is a very important thing is looking at the percentile rank, which is the third column down at the bottom here. And that tells us where those bulls, the specific bull, I don't even know who this guy is actually, but it tells us that he's in the top 20% of the breed for yearling weight, top 10% of the breed for weaning weight, and he's not very good, honestly, in the bottom 95% for birth weight. So just as an example, that those are the numbers I look at, as well as accuracy, which is the number below the EPD that tells us how accurate those numbers are. Quite often, young bulls aren't very accurate. They're just a projection from pedigrees. So those accuracy numbers are very important. This particular one gets pretty high. Those are 85% accurate, which is pretty good. But a lot of young bulls will be, I'm going to say 20% or 30%. So not very accurate. That means they could change. If they were true calving ease bulls, they might change. If they were really good yearling weight bulls, they would change. But this guy would stay kind of close to where he's at in terms of accuracy. So there's some other things that I think we all have to keep in mind, and myself as well, at home. There's a bunch of things that are very influential in what happens on farm. So uh, we talked a bit about here already about EPDs and how to select bulls. But there's a lot of things on farm that are involved as well. So I just want to mention about birth weight. You can select the best birth weight bull, whether it's a bull or an AI sire. But there's other things that are influential in that as well. So exercise is a big thing, nutrition is a big thing, gestation length is a big thing, and all those things combine together to affect birth weight. So, uh, and that's just an example. I think if we talk about yearling weight, it would be the same. So there's a bunch of things that are involved here. Aside from your genetic selection, that can change how your actual performance on farm works. So again here, I'll just talk about know your cow herd. What are you looking for in a sire? Everything's different. There's lots of promotion on different bulls, different sires. I work for an AI company. You promote particular bulls, but not always are they the ones you want. So you need to be aware of what your actual goals are, whether it be birth weight, whether it be um, performance or milk or even structure somehow. That's what you need to ask questions about. So everybody's herd is a little different, and I think mine from my neighbors is. So I guess my real message here is to know what you want to do, and then selection of sires comes back to how you get there. So I just I'll reiterate that that even my goals are different than my neighbors for sure. So think about what you want to do, and there's lots of tools, breeders, as well as EPDs, genetic evaluators. There's lots of options to think about what kind of sires you need. Not necessarily follow the trends, and I shouldn't say that because I know different people market things in different ways. But just think about what your goals are at home and make sure that whatever sire you're going to select meets those goals. And again, here it comes back to your in-herd goals. Some people market cattle um, on farm, or they do um, meat program or something like that. which should be completely different than someone else that wants to market them in another way. So yeah, there's lots of options. But I think the basics of my presentation would be know your cow herd and know what you want to do. And then I think the sire selection comes secondary to that, as opposed to trying to find a sire that's going to do everything for you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Scott. We've got some questions that are sort of starting to come into the chat here. Anybody that thinks of other things they'd like to ask, by all means, share them. I've got a few things that I've jotted down as well that I stick in if I get a chance. But if you guys beat me to it, your questions will beat mine. So Scott, to start here, Annette's asked, what sort of physical attributes should I look for when selecting a bull? Obviously, that's maybe a big question, but see if you've got some comments to share there.
No, it's a great question, and I'm a better question answerer than I am presenter, so I'll admit that. So there's a few things in my mind that are very important, and that's every bull or sire you should select should have good feet, good legs, certain things like that. Then you get into other traits that different breeds have. We have Herefords at home, or half of our cows are. So then we look into polled, horned, heterozygous, homozygous, markings on their eyes, all those other things. But I really do think that there are certain things that are, no matter what breed you have, feet and udders and those kinds of things are very important. So regardless of breed, but then when you get into other more, breed specific things, there are other traits that do come into importance there for sure.
Fair enough. So kind of maybe the other side of that question for someone looking at purchasing a bull, what sort of key numbers would they or would you suggest they look at or focus on?
Yeah, and I think that's specific to everyone. Everybody's different, you know. I know breeders that don't look at birth weight whatsoever. Um, in our what we do at home, birth weight's something we do look at. Not that we need the small birth weight, but we don't want to get to a level that's not, not compatible with what we're doing. Um, so things like that, yeah, I'm every breeder should have something a little different. One thing people should realize too is a really, really high milk number is good. So milk is measured on performance. So it's a result of the calves that are born from those sires. And if you don't have enough feed, or your feeding program is different, you won't be able to achieve those numbers. So not necessarily every time is a higher number better. And that goes for growth or any of those traits. But again, it comes back to what you have at home. I think a lot of us assume that higher milk's better, lower birth's better, higher weaning's better, higher yearling's better, but it not necessarily for your program. I'll say that.
That's a really good point because you mentioned in the deck too that it's genetics plus environment, right? So those EPD numbers are giving people the genetic potential of what that animal can do, but you're right, it's got to fit with your system because if you're looking for a super low maintenance system, then maybe maximum milk production is not what you're going for.
No, no, exactly. And there's a
Uh,
couple other things there you can look for as well, as frame score and those kinds of things. Like if you're more of a grass-fed person, lower frame score is usually better. The high performance cattle don't work in those situations. So I think everybody needs to know what their goals are.
that makes a lot of sense. Another sort of a selection question here. Does always selecting for calving ease eventually lead to calving problems in heifers?
That's a good question. And I don't have an answer. I guess I have a theory. I think eventually you'll get there and you'll get more moderate cattle. And then if that's not your goal, fine. If it is, fine. I I do think you'll eventually get there, but I am a big promoter of using good birth weight cattle on heifers and then really changing that as a 2-year old or 3-year old or 4-year old. But I just, yeah, in my opinion, if you keep going down one road, you'll eventually get to a point where that could be an issue. That's single trait selection. Excuse me. And it goes with anything else like yearling weight, weaning weight. If you do a single trait selection, I do think you'll go down a path where um yeah, you're missing out on a lot of other things or a lot of other opportunity.
Right. That makes sense. So it's, yeah, trying to look at the big picture instead of, like you said, chasing one trait.
Right.
And again, whether we just talked about milk, and maybe you're not always looking for maximum milk for birth weights, like you said, maybe it's a low birth weight's good for your heifers, but if you keep chasing one direction, you're giving up
Right.
other stuff. That makes some sense.
Right.
Another EPD question. Can you compare the EPDs from one bull in one breed to the EPDs of a bull of a different breed? Example, Charolais versus Simmental, or should you use the percent ranking to compare bulls of different breeds?
So you yeah, the answer is use the breed averages within each breed. You can't compare breed to breed. Now, there are some across breed comparisons, so I'm not fully aware of all those. Bio did have some of those at some points, so I can't speak to those. But anything that is breed oriented, you need to compare within that breed and look at those rankings. So within a Charolais breed, likely your birth weight could be very good. But within the maybe the Angus breed, it's still very good, but not the same as the Charolais breed. I don't know if that, hopefully I'm making sense there, but
I think so. And I mean, if we're not answering your questions or if you've got follow-up, feel free to type more stuff in the chat. But yeah, I think the take home is EPDs are within, like you can only compare within a breed.
right.
Um, and then you can get an idea of where they rank inside that breed with that percentage. But yeah, in terms of comparing different breeds, it's a little more get a step back a little bit, I guess.
Well, just explain that, Chad, that all this information comes in through breed associations.
Right.
There is some that goes through a few other things, but most of the EPDs that you will see are driven through a breed association. So all that information comes in through either Charolais, Hereford, Angus. So that's why it's separate. But I will say I think there is some other opportunities out there. I just don't know them very well.
Um, can you speak to the benefits of using artificial insemination? I gotta spell that out now because AI has so many different meanings. Um, can you use the benefits of using artificial insemination versus purchasing a bull? And I probably for the most part, I think James is looking at commercial breeders here.
Yeah, so I'll be quite honest, and I work for an artificial insemination company. Um, there's different benefits. Um, how do I say this? If you really research, and I'll be honest here, if you research a good bull and buy a good bull, I think I shouldn't say this out loud, and my boss will kill me, but I think you've done a good job. AI, artificial insemination, does give you some opportunity in terms of knowing your cow herd when they calve. You can do some synchronization. You can use different genetics that you probably couldn't afford or couldn't find or what who whatnot. So artificial insemination gives you that opportunity to use something that you probably couldn't normally use. Now, having said that, if you research and buy a really, really good bull, I'm not opposed to that either. The other thing with artificial insemination, a lot of people synchronize now, or we have quite a few beef breeders that do that. gives you an opportunity to get those cows and calves. So in terms of synchronizing them, having them bred on the date you want, then you can preg check them and then get the ones that aren't in calf pregnant again. And I know everyone thinks you throw the bull out and they all get in calf. I totally agree, but they might not get in calf when you want them either. So that synchronization gives you an opportunity to get another 21 days on a bunch of calves, and we know what calves are worth now. So it does give you some options right now to make, some dollars in terms of pounds when you ship your calves, if your management is at that level.
It makes a lot of sense. Um, Question here, and I don't know if you can answer this fully or not, but why is frame score not listed on many bulls in the beef catalogs?
That's a very good question because yeah, so frame score is taken at a certain time. Quite often those bulls aren't in the right place to have that done. Plain and simple. We have a challenge getting sires into stud at the right times and have those scores taken at the right times. So that's the answer, plain and simple. Unfortunately, um, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
reason.
fair enough. Another catalog question here. Is the online catalog all the bulls offered, or are you able to get other breeds that may not be listed?
I think right now everything that is available is on there. But I will need to double check that, but I believe everything that's available. Sometimes, unfortunately, we or CMEX will purchase bulls. People will hear of them, but until they actually have semen, they won't be on there. So
Won't show up.
that's the little caveat there that we aren't gonna. We've been we've got better at that. I think not advertising sires that aren't available.
Um, Another question here from Annette. Do calves from bulls sourced from the prairie provinces have low birth weight and a high rate of growth if raised in an ideal environment?
Say that again.
Sure. So sorry, now I got to say it right. Do calves from bulls sourced from the prairie provinces have low birth weight and a high rate of growth if raised in an ideal environment? Annette, if you have a follow-up to that, I'm not totally sure I understand that question. If you're just thinking there's a trend towards Western bulls maybe having lower birth weights and higher rate of growth.
No, it's a good question. I hate to put any area into a corner because I think our genetics can be very similar. Quite often, whatever those calves are out of bulls that we have here in Ontario too. This goes back to environment. Those folks seem to be able to calve out higher birth weight cattle and get along just fine. And for some reason, and I don't know totally why, but we need to watch birth weight here more than they do for some reason. Maybe I'm completely wrong there, but I wouldn't say that our genetics are completely different on average. I know there are different genetics here and there, especially you get into, the Western states and that there's a lot of different genetics there. But in terms of Canada, I know, if people that are AIing here are using the same bulls that they're using in Alberta. So I think that part comes down to environment a bit. Um, yeah, that's just in my opinion.
No, that's fair. Stephanie is asking, how much does the bull genetics versus the cow genetics um, lead to a great calf? So her sort of example is if I have a good cow, I usually get a good calf. So does the cow put more, like she's suggesting, is it like 70% cow and 30% bull?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what the percentages are, but I'm going to use the 50-50, but maybe it's a little higher on the bull. I really don't know. I think it must be in terms of how we've started to use different sires over the years to improve those cow herds. So I'm hoping there's a little bit more on the bull, but a very good point. Um, the cow is very significant. And I don't think a lot of farmers put enough emphasis on that. I think they, you know, I bred to this bull, I should have the best calf, but I really believe that the cow herd is a big portion of that. So that's a really good question. I don't have the answer what the percentage might be. But yeah, if you have good cows, they make good calves too. So and we've seen that before in a bunch of different scenarios where all the bull didn't work or didn't do what he was supposed to do. Well, it's partly the cow herd too. So and it goes back to cow herd and environment. Exactly.
Well, and that's what I was just thinking is genetically, and I'm no geneticist, but I think it should be sort of pretty close to 50-50. I mean, some traits are a little different, but the cow probably does have a lot more to do with the environment because, I mean, she's the one that has to build the calf and feed the calf and raise the calf, right? So maybe that's where, in some ways, maybe like Stephanie's example, you're seeing more of an influence from the cow because she's the on the ground environment. I don't know. Alex is wondering, would a local bull developed in your exact environment perform better than one from a similar environment but not local? So his example is Northern Ontario versus the prairies.
So that's a very good question too. And this is I'm just going to use ourselves as an example because we have purchased animals from Western Canada, from the US, and they come to our environment. And there is a period of adjustment there. No denying that cattle that come from Alberta to Ontario, there's an adjustment time. Whether genetically that makes a huge difference, if you're to purchase a bull from some other place and he comes here, but I know physically, it'll take them a while to get into our humidity or, our climate, that kind of thing. So, it's a very good question. Um, Genetically, they should be the same or could be the same. But again, it comes down to our environment. And I know when we buy, and the few times that we've done it, we'll buy something from Western Canada. We don't really pay attention to them for a year because it takes them a while to adjust, climatize, but genetically they are the same. So it comes back to that environment kind of thing, in my opinion.
Um, this isn't really a bull question, but a follow-up that I just thought of. Do you think the environment that animals come from is more critical if you're looking at bringing in heifers or cows or something for the cow herd versus the bull?
Yeah, I don't know that. That's I don't have a good.
Yeah, I don't know either. It just occurred to me as you were answering Alex's question there, but I
Yeah,
know in extreme examples where I mean people have brought Canadian genetics to Mexico or something, for example, they generally often try and bring younger females so they're not they they have more of a
right.
chance to acclimatize before they mature, but I just anyway, I was just curious. Um James is wondering just a little different angle here, what some of the reasons we should take into account when deciding if and when to replace a bull. So like age, breeding success, minimum number of open cows or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that before. And we've just started to do this in the last few years. I think everyone should do a breeding exam on a bull before they use them. Um, we hadn't done that for years, and we should have. So getting them semen tested, just things like that. And we hadn't done that, and I think we should have. And I think everyone should have, because a bull eventually will stop being fertile. whether he's 5 years old or 10 years old. And everyone has the story of yeah, I got a bull that's 14 that's still breeding the cows, but eventually he won't breed the cows. So I do truly believe everyone needs to spend a bit more time on that. And I know he got the cows and calf last year, but it doesn't hurt to get them tested again. And I know we've seen that a bit on, bulls that we've sold to people, over a number of years, and they want to keep them because they're great bulls and they're 8 years old, but they're not going to get their cows and calf. So I think everyone needs to maybe spend a bit more effort and time into doing a semen test, fertility test before they use them, whether the bull's 2 or 10, in my opinion.
Makes a lot of sense. And as you mentioned earlier, the way the market is now, open cows cost a lot of money, right?
Really.
Open cows are cows that are calving, a cycle or two later because the bull can't get them pregnant as quickly as he used to.
Exactly.
Um, Another kind of question along those lines: do you have any tips around managing the bull after the breeding season to sort of set him up for success for the following year?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. Especially young bulls, you want to give them a chance to rebuild their, I don't know what you would call it, like get back to shape.
Yep,
Um, whereas usually 4 or 5 year old bulls, they don't need a lot, but yearling bulls, if you've used them hard, they need to have an opportunity to rebound from a breeding season. So I would put that, and bulls aren't hard to really manage other than they'll wreck everything. So, um, yeah, they just all they need is a little bit of feed. But yeah, they're a pain in the butt to manage through that. I'll call it the dry time of the cow season. But
for sure. We could probably have another whole podcast on the best way to manage bulls that aren't with cows, or another webinar, sorry. Um, Ryan here is asking, um, oh, sorry, this is more of a comment actually, but that's okay. I'll share it with everybody anyway. Remember that the bull breeds all your cows. So a good bull is good for a good cow, but he brings up the quality from your poorer cows too.
yeah,
Um,
good point.
Basically just a reminder, I guess, that whatever your cow herd, those genetics, the bull's genetics are going in across the board, I guess, to hopefully improve everybody. Um, Denise, I know you can purchase sex semen, but can you order sex semen in regards to having a goal of building your females within your herd to AI your best cows? So,
Yep.
yes.
So very good question. Some of the sex semen is pretty limited right now from some companies for a number of reasons. But there is an opportunity there, and I think that will grow. Um, and not just necessarily female sex semen, male sex semen in a commercial operation. I think everybody knows what a pound of a calf is worth now. So people that aren't looking to build the cow herd from their own herd, um, there is that option. It's just that's kind of it's been around a while in the dairy side of things. It's just on the beef side that it's been a little slower, specifically from some companies. You also have to consider some conception rate decline there with sex semen, whether it's male or female. It isn't as good as conventional, but getting close, and it's definitely an option for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, something that's certainly made a big difference in the dairy industry too.
Mhm.
Um, Comment that leads into a question here. After using AI for many years, Sharon's noticed that gestation periods have shortened. Cows are calving up to 11 days before the estimated date on the AI slip very often. Could this be due to improved bull genetics over the years?
Uh, Great
And
question. Um, I'd love to. That might depend on the sire she's using because it's very closely correlated to birth weight. So if you're selecting sires that are lower birth weight, your gestation normally will be less. So if she is selecting sires that are low birth weight, and maybe the dam is lower birth weight, likely the gestation will be less. And keep in mind that gestation chart is just an average, so it's just a guideline. But yeah, if you're selecting for lower birth weight, gestation will normally be less. I'm not going to say all the time, but that's quite often the way. And
That's
if
the
you get those giant calves, normally the gestation is longer because those calves will gain a pound a day after their normal due date. So those would be the higher birth weight calves on average. I'm not going to say that that happens every time, but pretty close. So likely, if you're selecting for birth weight, you will get lower gestation.
that makes some sense too. This is Annette. Sorry, I wasn't trying to ignore you. I'm sorting through all these questions. This is sort of a follow-up to her earlier question about the prairies. She said she asked about the bulls from the prairies because she was told that the herds are humongous over there. Ranchers let nature do the selection because they don't assist calving because the herds are too big.
Yeah, I guess I do agree. They're large herds and they don't have a lot of time to deal with some of those issues. But I'll also say that in Ontario now, most of us have off-farm jobs, and we don't have a lot of time to deal with that either. So yeah, I don't know quite how to answer that. Maybe they're a little more critical on how they select. I'm not sure how to answer that one.
Yeah, and I wonder too that that might be, I mean, the trend is probably for bigger herds in the West, but I think that's a little bit of a generalization, obviously, too. And I don't know how many big ranches with the Costa calves right now. I'm not sure how many ranches are letting nature do the selection. Like I would be surprised too many herds are saying they're not assisting at calving, because that's a lot of money to give up, even for somebody that's got hundreds of cows. That's just my guess. I don't know, but maybe it's more important to them in turn. Like maybe some of those larger herds would prioritize it more. But to what you've been saying all night, it depends on the individual herd too and what their priorities are.
Totally.
Somebody in Ontario that has 12 cows but has an off-farm job and they're never home might prioritize calving Eve more than somebody with 300 cows in Saskatchewan that's home all the time. I don't know.
Yeah. No, good answer, Chad. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's an answer. I'll call it a comment. Um, Dan is wondering, and I don't know if you'll have this information or not, what on average would a breeding soundness exam cost to get a vet to come out and do that?
Well, it's a vet fee, and then whatever they
Right.
charge to do it. So whatever it costs for you to get a vet out, plus the 50 or $60 for him to do it, or what. I'm just generalizing there big time, but it'll
Yep.
be, yeah, that's kind of what it would cost.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And it might vary a little bit. And again, you got to compare that with the cost of your bull not working, I guess, too, or working less than 100%.
Yeah, the cost of a bull not working is very bad, actually.
Well, we're talking finances. Let's go a couple of these questions. And this is a loaded one. How much should you pay for a good bull?
It is a loaded one right now.
I know.
Yeah, yeah, there's different formulas that um I guess that's up to, again, every breeder, but I think we know what cull bulls are worth now. And if you value what you're purchasing and the bull is going to do what you want him to do, as we said with selection, and he's got what you need him to do, um, I'm not sure, I'm not going to say a number, but I think it's a lot different than it was 5 years ago. So I think everyone needs to get their head around, we're sending the old bull for X amount, and we can throw the price of a couple calves in there and get a really good bull for X amount. So I'm not gonna. challenge numbers there, but there is a lot of value in those bulls, and then I'll call it the resale value is pretty high now too. And from everything we've heard, and I'm sure on some of these calls, it looks promising. So I'm not going to say any numbers, but it's definitely different than it was 5 years ago.
Yes, no, that's fair. Um, and kind of on the same vein, and again, there we're asking for numbers, but we can generalize a bit too. Denise says, what qualities make a bull more expensive than another, i.e., a $10,000 bull versus $7,500 bull? So you can answer that, but I would sort of follow that up with, do you have any comments on how you can value a bull? Like if you're a producer out looking, how can you decide? And I guess this ties into the last one too. How do you decide what you can justify spending on that bull?
Well, I think there was just something come across my screen there on what a call bull's worth. So we start there. I mean, they're worth $4,000 or $5,000 for when you're done with him. So hopefully you value enough in that bull, and you're probably going to use them 2, 3, some people 4 years maybe. Just spread it out over your cow herd, guys, and I think you can quickly calculate what that should be. And I'll say if it's the bull you want, and again through that selection, whether if he's going to do what you want to do, you trust the breeder, you've talked to the breeder, you even looked at the cow that that bull's out of, and the feeder good and all that stuff. Yeah, that's I'm again, I'm not going to put a number on it, but we're beyond where we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I don't think you we're expecting a number, but that gives people a lot of good things to think about in terms of how to figure out what they can afford to pay or justify paying.
Right.
Denise sort of has a
Right.
follow here to that question around
Yep.
the 10,000 versus 7,500. She said, we've watched bulls sell at the same sale, the same sire, but obviously from a different cow.
Yep.
How do you value the qualities that that cow brought to the table with those two different bulls? So two
Cow.
half brothers essentially is what she's saying. Two bulls at the same sale from the same sire. But I'm going to
Right.
guess this is because this is building on her example of 10,000 versus 7,500. So
Right. Yeah.
two
Yeah.
half brothers that, and I mean, this gets into some auction sale dynamics too. But
Totally. And it gets into statistics too, to be quite honest with you, with the sample size we're dealing with. If you use two full brothers, uh, you would need 500 calves of each sire to get a real good evaluation. So and I see that quite often, right? We've got 5 calves out of this bull and 7 out of this one. These ones outsold that one. Honestly, I don't think there's enough statistics there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was a lot more here. But that's a tough one to evaluate. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at
yeah,
that.
no, that's fair. And that's the joys of an auction sale is all it takes is two people who want something. It can make a big difference to the price.
Oh,
So
different day, different time too. Yep, for sure.
Tom's got a question that kind of builds on some of your comments around statistics. He asks, do you have a minimum accuracy rating for an EPD to select a sire based on?
Yeah, so there is a minimum. I'm just going to speak of the breeds that I know that they have to be 30% or they don't get a rating. They're just called a pedigree estimate. So in the old days, that's what it was, pedigree estimate. So you take the cow, take the bull, and you put them together, and it's averages. So now there is a little bit of a yeah, most of them you'll see are will be 30 or above. Um, but I will say 30 is not very accurate. So it's a very minimum number.
That makes some sense. Um, just we're getting close to time here. I've got one I'll throw in. If anybody else has something they want to sneak in the chat, now is your chance. Um, if you're, and obviously we've talked about a lot of different traits, producers looking for bulls, if there's one thing that they should sort of be asking their prospective bull supplier, I'm going to Scott Cornish's house to see if I want a bull. What's one of the few main things I should be asking? I'm
So
thinking
again,
more around like cow herd and program as opposed to individually, which bull do you think has the best feet is kind of an obvious question, but sort of more generally.
yep. No, that's a very good question, Chad. So I'm gonna call most of us on the call a typical cattle producer that wants to build a herd or have daughters out of their cows. So that is a very good question. What's the cow look like? Can I see her? And maybe she's been there for 14 years and she's gone now, which is that says something to me if she did that. So typically that's what I would think people should ask. Talk about udders, feet, just how long she been around, those kind of things. Lots of people don't even ask about a cow. And I think that's important, especially with most of the people that I would assume would be on the call trying to build a cow herd or keep some replacements. Now, on the other side, if they're not, if they're trying to do some other things, and some people do, they buy in replacements from somewhere else, and that's fine, then maybe you need more of a terminal animal and an animal that not necessarily has the best feet, but is really thick and high performing and that kind of thing. So, yeah, in my opinion, most people would want to keep their own females, but there's lots that don't. So the ones that don't maybe want a little bit different, ask a few different questions than what the people do that are trying to keep a cow herd and build a cow herd and keep their own replacements.
That makes sense. I'm going to try and squeak one more in here, and you can wait as little or as far into this as you want. Is purebred bulls kind of the way to go, or should people be considering hybrid bulls as a viable option?
Yeah, that's a deep one, age-old question. I guess I'm more traditional, but if we look at other proteins that we're competing against, um, the hybrids are what's driving those proteins. So I do, I think there's a place for them. I think a bit of our issue is our cow herds aren't consistent enough to use some of those hybrid bulls in Ontario, and I know there'll be people argue with me here 100%. But I think one purebred bull, because we even got to look at some of these purebreds aren't purebreds anymore. So Simmentals, Limousines, a bunch of those cattle are percentage cattle to start with. So we don't call them hybrids, but they're not purebreds either. So on the cow herds that we have, we're introducing two breeds there, and the cow herd has three breeds, and so I do think there is a place for hybrids on a consistent cow herd. I just don't know that we have enough consistent cow herds to make full advantage of that. And maybe I know someone will argue with me on that, but that's just my opinion. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's what we're here for. So it is 8 o'clock. I think I better call the questions there. But thank you so much, Scott, for joining us tonight for the presentation and all this discussion. I think you've given everyone a lot of good things to think about and a lot more knowledge to take away for our next bull purchases.